Before I dive into the cheerful topic of death, I would like to express my gratitude to a few people who helped me through this research process. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Mrs. Sarah DeWitt for being a great instructor, capstone guru, second mother, and for reassuring me that dropping out of school at this point in the school year would not be a very wise decision. I want to also thank my University of Oklahoma consultants for reading my rough draft papers and guiding me towards other University of Oklahoma students pursuing my topic. And lastly, I'd like to thank my fellow AP Research classmates for picking my papers apart and not leaving a question unasked. Speaking of questions, I have one for you all. Have any of you ever played 20 questions?
Yes.
All right, if so, the question, what is your worst fear, has probably come up. Some fears include arachnophobia, which is the fear of spiders, electrophobia, which is the fear of chickens, or even thanatophobia, which is the fear of death. The one that this presentation is going to focus on is thanatophobia, the fear of death. Whether they be afraid of how they die, what happens after they pass away, or if they're afraid of who and or what they will leave behind. While an overwhelming majority of the population does not know how they're going to die, there is a small percentage of people who do know how they're going to die. Those people are choosing to die at the hands of a physician in a process known as euthanasia. This presentation will explore the Netherlands and the United States' opposing views on euthanasia. And why their views do not concur, and advocate for why euthanasia should be legal in the United States. Specifically, I looked into the economic and emotional impacts that euthanasia has on the community, which led me to my hypothesis of, by legalizing euthanasia in the United States, it would allow for a less painful death for those who are suffering from an incurable disease. It will allow the patients to also have more of a choice on how they pass away. The goal of this research is to prove why euthanasia would be beneficial to those suffering for the reasons previously discussed. Euthanasia, as defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is the act or practice by physicians of killing someone who is very sick or injured in order to prevent any further suffering. The countries that I looked at were the Netherlands and the United States because they both have very different views on euthanasia. On one hand, euthanasia is legal in the Netherlands, but on the other hand, the United States has a practice banned. It was also hypothesized that autonomy, which is the right to govern oneself, played a large role in the reasoning behind the country's discrepancies and views on euthanasia. And would you please refer to Appendix 1 for this part of my presentation. In the beginning, I knew I wanted to pursue a topic that had to do with controversial topics within the field of medicine. I knew I wanted to stay under this umbrella because when I graduate, I would like to pursue a career in the medical field. But there's so many controversial topics within the field of medicine. After researching, I knew that I wanted to look at euthanasia. Then there was the question of if I wanted to be pro or against euthanasia. After further research, I knew that I would argue for the pro-euthanasia. The next part was a research question. In the beginning of this, I was struggling to figure out how to word my research question. My preliminary question was, looking at the economical and social aspects of countries that allow euthanasia and or physician-assisted suicide, how do they relate and differ to those of the United States? After it was reviewed by my classmates, I found that the scope of this question was way too broad to complete in the 6-month period while staying within the 4,000 to 5,000 word count. The reason for this attitude toward this question was there are too many parts to the question, along with 2 practices that I was going to analyze for both nations. I then revised the question to lessen the amount of components in the question. I added a time frame to specify how far into the future I was looking into. Although it was still wordy, it was closer to what I ended up with. I then revised my question, again, concentrating on one aspect of euthanasia. For the second and final time, I put it through a group of students to review, and it was approved. My final research question was, unlike the Netherlands, who utilize the practice of euthanasia countrywide, how would the practice be beneficial to those? How would the practice be beneficial to the United States, who does not allow euthanasia in any of its states, if implemented throughout the country in the next 15 years? Please refer to Appendix 2 for my next part. When given the task of picking a research method, we were given a sheet of sample methods to look over. My options have been narrowed down to either a meta-analysis or a case study method. I believed that the case study method was going to be the best fit for my research. The case study method is the observation of a specific group to determine how and why a situation exists within that group. This is what I was looking to do by exploring how certain countries view the quality of life of their citizens in relation to their laws regarding euthanasia. Using this method can help me understand, ultimately, how the Netherlands and United States view the quality of life and its influence on the legality of euthanasia. This paper was also a qualitative study and was not designed to explore the United States and to explore the reasoning behind why euthanasia is not legalized for use in the United States and is legalized for use in the Netherlands, by looking at various determining factors that influence the decisions made by those countries. Although the study was mainly qualitative, there were points in my paper when quantitative data was needed. The qualitative data collection was ultimately chosen over the mixed method because the original hypothesis dealt with autonomy and quality of life in both nations. One major thing that was found out while searching databases for information was that euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide were not the same thing. Coming from a background that did not include very much information on medical practices, physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia were thought to be the same thing, when they are not. The key difference between the two is who administers the drug. As stated on the screen, physician-assisted suicide is when a doctor prescribes the drug to the patient and the patient can take the drug on their own anywhere they want to. But through euthanasia, the physician himself administers the drug to the patient on the grounds of his or her facility. An overwhelming majority of the data collected was collected from databases that were found on the Norman High and University of Oklahoma library web pages, as well as books from the respective place. Both of these sites have scholarly and peer-reviewed papers available, but the University of Oklahoma was used mainly because it did have many more sources than a Norman High library site. These sites were chosen over others because of the credibility and reliability they possessed. Because the topic at hand is so controversial, it was imperative that the papers were as unbiased as possible to get the most valid information. Through thorough research and discussion, the findings concurred with the original hypothesis and revealed that euthanasia could be a beneficial practice for those people of the United States if implemented over the next 15 years. As previously stated, euthanasia is a very controversial topic within the world of medicine and has even started to extend into society. But by looking at the positive aspects of euthanasia, it was discovered that it could have been very beneficial on society. Of these benefits, euthanasia can help with economic and emotional pitfalls that come with prolonging the life of somebody who is terminally ill. Now, it's no surprise that medical bills are expensive. But just how expensive do you think it can be to keep someone alive in the intensive care unit every single day? $100? $1,000? Try $10,000 a day. According to Ira Byatt, a physician specializing in palliative care, today's medicine has gotten good at keeping the terminally ill alive by treating the symptoms around the inevitable death, hence the large price tag. Furthering this, in a 2009 60-minute story titled "The Cost of Dying," the story explained that Medicare paid $55 billion just for doctor and hospital bills during the last 2 months of a patient's life. With all this money being poured into prolonging the life of a dying patient, it leaves little money for the family to operate on. By using euthanasia before the days and bills start stacking up, families of those who are dying can end things quickly and painlessly, not only for the patient, but for themselves. All in all, euthanasia would save families hundreds of thousands of dollars by not keeping a dying patient alive, and also allowing the families of the patients to save themselves from debt and bankruptcy. Coupling with the economic hardships, the emotional downfalls of keeping someone alive can be overwhelming. In some cases, in a terminally ill patient, their condition will fluctuate, sometimes for the good, and give false hope to his or her loved ones. But unfortunately, Sometimes they just don't get better. And seeing someone you love in such pain and suffering can launch the healthy into depression or even various other diseases or illnesses. Considering all these factors, much like the economic reasoning, utilizing euthanasia to end their suffering can also help in gaining closure and eventually accepting the reality. The legalization of euthanasia in the Netherlands was driven by the fact that the Dutch want to have control over their bodies. They feel that they should be in total control, or they feel that they should be in control of their death because it is something highly personal to them. The autonomy of the Dutch is much more coveted within their culture than it is the United States. With this being said, the Netherlands has a euthanasia program that has been used multiple times by those who are Dutch and by those who are not, but just one time. On this slide, you can see that the annual euthanasia rate has grown from 2006 to 2013, and I looked for more up-to-date information, but unfortunately 2013 was the closest I could get to this year. So following the curve, it's probably up above 5,000, closer to 6,000 by now. Although the United States allows physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia is still far from being considered. It was hypothesized that is because the autonomy of its citizens has not been taken completely seriously. Because of this, the right to privacy has been called into question because the restrictions being put on how you pass away. People just want control. When cancer has taken over their bodies and they no longer have control, they desperately seek something to have control of. But if the Fourth Amendment right to privacy would be thought of more in regards to euthanasia, then it might not be so hard to digest, and maybe they could see how euthanasia could be beneficial. And would you please refer to Appendix 3? This photo on my presentation is a little bit outdated, and I have included a more up-to-date map of the United States. The dark blue states that are the ones that have euthanasia legalized. As you can see, California have recently been added to this list. Montana is the only place where physician-assisted suicide is legal under court ruling. New Mexico is the only state where the law is under review by the Supreme Court. The tan states are the states where the legislation is currently under review. And finally, the red states are where physician-assisted suicide is illegal. An inconsistency was observed in the United States, or an inconsistency that was observed in the United States is that it allows pulling the plug, which is more formally known as taking a patient off of life support, and not euthanasia. But what's the difference? By unplugging a patient, aren't you ending their life? Euthanasia is quick and painless because of the drugs administered, taking little time to work. But with pulling the plug, there's an indefinite amount of time that the patient will take to finally pass. From minutes to hours to even days, this process can be drawn out and painful for those surrounding the patient. Although the benefits of euthanasia have been argued, there are implications that follow the legalization of euthanasia. For example, Switzerland legalized the practice. They did not require those who utilize euthanasia to be Swiss. From 2008 to 2012, 611 people from surrounding nations went to Switzerland just to die. This is called suicide tourism. This is a rising issue because of the influx of people traveling there just for the purposes of dying. It is unclear what protocols are in Sweden to get the procedure done, but there are concerns that non-terminally ill and psychologically ill patients will travel there just to die, instead of being terminally ill. The Swedes are now passing a law requiring those who want to use euthanasia to be citizens for at least 6 months to avoid the influx of tourists coming through and utilizing their euthanasia program. This information was gathered from an article titled Death Tourism, a Euthanasia Holiday, from a New Zealand resource for life-related issues. Another implication is the believed undermining of medical research. If these people with incurable illnesses are choosing to die, then finding cures for those diseases would be difficult because of the pool of patients dying. The limitations on this project worth mentioning was the amount of time allotted and the money. Because we only had about 6 months to this project, I was not able to work in the history like I had wanted to. By researching the history, I would have liked to have been able to include the early figures in euthanasia, such as Jack Kevorkian, also known as Dr. Death, and how euthanasia came about. The second limitation was money. I would find an abstract on a database that would seem to work for my paper, but in order to view this paper, there was a fee that needed to be paid. There were multiple papers that required these fees just to be viewed, and I was not in the position to spend 3 figures on research papers that could either be hit or miss. Overall, what I want you to take away from this presentation is that knowing how you're going to die is not such a bad thing. It is also not such a bad thing to end the pain before it engulfs your life. Sure, there are implications and consequences, but there are pitfalls to everything. If someone were to pursue this topic in the future, a good lens to look through would be the opposite of what I argued. Through researching my argument, a lot of the opposing views came through. I think it would be interesting for somebody to research why euthanasia should not be legal and compare to the results of my study. But if someone were to continue my topic, I think it would be interesting to research further into the history of euthanasia and how it came about, and why it has remained a popular mode in some countries of alleviating the pain and taking the life of a human being. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. I'll start off with a question. What were the strategies you used to conduct a review of the literature? And there's 2 follow-ups. I'll read them and can repeat them later. Why did you select those strategies? And then did you reject any strategies?
1 moment, please, while I review my notes. My strategy, although a bit barbaric, was that of trial and error. I began with EBSCO and exhausted all the searches I could, reading parts of papers to determine if they would work, and either saved it or discarded it. I repeated this process with all the databases I used to find information. I was satisfied with this strategy, so I did not attempt any other one, making it impossible to consider or reject any other strategies.
Thank you.
Bailey, how might your conclusions, your findings relate to the current body of work in your field that you were working in?
Well, although I'm a senior in high school and I probably can't make too much of a dent in the medical body, my conclusions generally relate to the pro-euthanasia advocates. But because I explored my own knowledge gap, it does not perfectly fit into one category of information. At the same time, relating with those who believe euthanasia should be legalized. But relating to the ones that should be legalized, I believe if my paper were to be read in the hopes that somebody would take it into consideration, that I could help the United States see why euthanasia could be a beneficial thing to its citizens.
Hi, Mary.
Hi.
This is a 2-part question. First question is, in which specific part of your research process was your consultant most helpful, and how was he or she most helpful? Question 2 is, what did you learn from the consultants about your field of research?
I had 2 consultants, and my first consultant, he was most helpful with editing my papers and suggesting other places to look for information. The other one connected me to a young woman who is in one of his undergraduate classes that is also exploring euthanasia. Although I attempted to contact her, I never got anything back from her, but the gesture was very helpful. I learned from them that I need to have an open mind, because I went into this arguing for just pro-euthanasia, but after I sent them my papers, they were saying that I was developing my argument too early and that it sounded like I was beating a dead horse with legalized euthanasia, but I needed to chill a little bit on that aspect, so.
Are there any follow-up questions? Thank you, Bailey.